In this episode, we begin our journey on the edge of North Staffordshire. The great Swythamley estate sprawled across a beautiful landscape bounded to the north by the great peaks of the Roaches and to the south by the wooded valleys around Leek Frith. The Swythamley estate can trace its history back many years, perhaps even to Saxon times, but we shall begin in 1654 when the manor was acquired by the Trafford family. It had passed through a whole series of hands before this point, but the Traffords were not newcomers and were already well rooted locally. They owned the nearby manor of Heaton and were a peaceful and well-placed family who ran the estate well throughout turbulent times and provided a welcome source of stability to their local tenants. Upon taking residence, they found the old manor house at Swythamley in some state and decided to improve and rebuild most of it along with many other buildings on the estate. One of these was Bearder Mill, and it has a link to a very charming tale concerning the wit and character of the Trafford family.
William de Trafford was a strong royalist, and during the Civil War he heard of the coming of Cromwell's army. Being a clever man, he immediately collected together all the cattle from the estate and hid them in the secretive Meal Ark Clough. Returning to Swythamley Hall, he then collected together all the silver and treasures and hid them underneath the floor of Bearder Mill. He quickly told all of his estate workers to flee, which they did without hesitation, but he remained behind at Bearder. When the Roundheads eventually arrived, they approached Bearder Mill and discovered the squire still there. But all he did was thresh the corn and repeat the words, "Now thus." Acting the country bumpkin worked. They took him for a fool, they left him, and Swythamley estate was saved. When he finally died at the grand old age of 92, he had engraved upon his tombstone a corn sheaf, some bags of money, and the words, "Now thus."
The Traffords remained with the estate for almost 200 years until, in 1831, they sold the whole of Swythamley to a Mr. John Brocklehurst for £50,000. John Brocklehurst considerably enlarged and improved the house, creating an irregular plan and frontage with a mix of classical, Italianate and Jacobean elements. In 1903, the Brocklehurst baronetcy was created for John's successor, Sir Philip Lancaster Brocklehurst. In 1908, his son, Sir Philip Lee Brocklehurst, came to fame when he spent his 21st birthday climbing Mount Erebus with Ernest Shackleton's Antarctic expedition. A budding explorer, he was hand-picked by Shackleton to be one of his team, whose aim was to brave Antarctica's interior to reach the magnetic South Pole. As with all the early Antarctic expeditions, they had a very tough time. During one part of the journey, the ice they were walking on broke away from the land and they were forced to go with it. They could have swam back, but quickly noticed they were being tracked by a pack of killer whales. Luckily, after a short time, the ice collided back with the land, and they were able to make their escape. Sir Philip Lee did not return completely unharmed, however. He lost his little toe to frostbite. Apparently, he managed to keep it with him in a jar on the mantelpiece, though after his death it could not be found. The story goes that a guest, mistaking it for an aperitif, ate it at the wake. Returning from Antarctica, Sir Philip went on to serve in the Life Guard during the First World War, and by the 1920s had achieved the rank of Lieutenant Colonel in the Egyptian Army. His brother Henry was also a brave heart, and the two were very close throughout their lives. Henry is locally famous for setting up a wildlife sanctuary beside Hen Cloud on the Roaches estate. When the sanctuary was closed after the war, he released many of the animals into the wild, notably a number of wallabies, which bred on the moor and during the 1950s had a colony several dozen strong. Sadly, this only colony of marsupials in Europe can no longer be seen, due to a series of severe winters and the sad impact of motor cars. During World War II, Philip was commanding the mechanised brigade of the Arab Legion, and Henry was serving in Burma. Sadly, Henry was not to return, and Sir Philip left a memorial stone on a large rock above the estate. On the death of the second baronet in 1975, the estate passed to his nephew John Ogilvy. He split up all the holdings and sold Swythamley soon after. When Ogilvy passed away in 1981, the line died with him. The estate has since then had mixed fortunes. It became a centre for transcendental meditation during the 80s and 90s, until being sold and developed into a series of luxury apartments, the whole interior being redesigned and sadly losing a long line of its history. It would be wonderful to think of viewing the hall like it was in Sir Philip's time. Let us now explore the great estate on foot, and begin our journey by the great boundary wall that still circles the heart of the estate.
The huge wall that surrounds the Swythamley estate was originally constructed in the 19th century. Many of the walls in the Peak District trick us into a belief that they are incredibly ancient. Covered in mosses and lichens, they have the appearance of something that has lasted many centuries. But in fact, most of the walls originate from the mid-18th century during the Enclosure Acts. Before this point, enclosure was often by the individual, and it would lead to arguments and indeed conflicts over who actually owned the land. Even after the Enclosure Acts, some areas still remained unenclosed, namely those vast tracts of endless moorland used as game reserves or often protected for their mineral rights. Around these moorlands, there still crisscrossed a whole network of roads, most of them ancient droveways, from which cattle would be moved to market. Along these paths not only went the cattle and the people, but also the myths and legends of many of these ancient places, and that's what we're going to explore now.
A walk is the best way of understanding a landscape. Reading a book will give you the history, driving by in a car will give you the views, but walking within it, away from noise and distractions, allows you to feel the landscape and understand the many layers wrapped up in a picture postcard view. All the stories in this landscape can be told in the dark gritstone in which they are rooted. We will start by following the course of the massive wall surrounding the Swythamley estate.
The wall walks the fell, grey millipede on slow stone hooves, his slack-backed hollowed at gullies and grooves, or shouldering over old boulders, too big to be rolled away. Fallen fragments of the high crags crawl in a walk of the wall. A wall walks slowly at each give of the ground, each creak of the rock's ribs. It puts its foot gingerly, arches its hoggles, lets cobble and knee joint settle and grip. As the slipping fellside erodes and drifts, the wall shifts with it. It's always on the move. They built a wall slowly, a day, a week. Built it to stand, but not stand still. They built a wall to walk.
Following the line of the wall and descending the old drove road, we reach our first patch of woodland. Not natural, but coniferous trees planted as a cash crop after the Second World War. When the price of timber fell, the plantation was left to decay and now holds a strange, eerie beauty. It's a warm spring day, but under the oppressive canopy the air is damp and carries a chill. Exit the woodland and you instantly enter another world. Bluebells crowd around the field boundary and give a distant view of our first goal, the Hanging Stone. This is an outlying pinnacle of the massive Roaches range, the peaks of Hen Cloud and Five Clouds visible on the hazy horizon. The Hanging Stone carries two plaques, one to Sir Philip's noble Mastiff Burke and the other to his fallen brother Henry. Many on passing have inquired as to why his dog deserved a more ornate memorial than his brother. From the sloping summit, an amazing view is gained of the whole of Sir Philip's estate, the deer park and its great dry stone wall joining holloways which snake over to the high moorland. Behind the stone, we reach a ridge of high ground dominated by rough pasture and heather moorland. Small pools are bristled full of water crowfoot, an unexpected sight in the brackish peaty waters. After half a mile on the ridge, we reach the ancient sunken holloway which descends into back forest, one that is wholly more ancient.
cold breeze issues forth from the depths of this unholy chasm.
Come on then.
This is Lud's Church. This massive chasm in the gritstone was formed at the end of the last ice age, when there was a colossal amount of water in the landscape, so much so that it caused this huge section of land to shift several feet down the hill, revealing this massive ravine in the rock. Of course, because of its temperature, because of the mosses and lichens and ferns clinging to its walls, because of its isolated location, many strange and wonderful legends have grown up around the place.
Walter de Ludac and his followers, the Lollards, were supporters of John Wycliffe, who was outlawed by the established church. They used the great chasm of Lud's Church during the summer months to conduct their religious services, and sometimes made it their home while they travelled the countryside spreading their doctrines. Many searches were made, but the forest was too large and dense for them to be discovered. One summer's day, the group assembled for a sermon. De Ludac stood at the head of a 14-strong congregation, amongst them his granddaughter, Alice, a lovely girl of 18 endowed with a matchless singing voice. Near the entrance to the cavern keeping watch was Heinrich Monter, the head forester, who used to carry food for them. He was a rugged and brave man, carrying in his belt a huntsman's horn, a heavy broadsword and a long dagger, whilst at his feet lay a crossbow and a sheaf of arrows. After a short prayer, the opening hymn began, but gradually the other singers stopped to listen to the beautiful voice of Alice. While engrossed in her angelic song, Monter failed to notice the sudden trampling of feet as a group of soldiers stormed into the rift. A tall, powerful man led the group and called on them to yield in the name of the king, but Monter darted forward and grabbed the officer, flinging him amongst the soldiers, whilst calling to the Lollards to escape through the other entrance. The soldiers opened fire wildly, and a bullet rebounded off the rock face to pierce Alice directly in the heart. She fell upon de Ludac and died there in his arms. Alice was later buried outside the entrance to Lud's Church, beneath the branches of the great oak tree. Most of the other Lollards were eventually captured, with only a few managing to disappear into the forest. They were taken to London as prisoners. A few were pardoned, but several were imprisoned for life, with de Ludac being hung for his so-called crime. Monter managed to make his escape and fled to France, where he stayed until the invasion by the English, whom he joined.
One of the most interesting local legends concerns a Mr. William Mills, who visited Lud Church in the 1870s. Armed only with some ball, a twine and a lantern, he descended one of the small caves in the side of the rift. It soon enlarged and he came upon a gigantic cavern. Inside there he found the remains of small temples and carvings all over the walls. He'd come to the realm of the fairies. It was never seen by human eyes again, but it's still said that little people inhabit this place. And remember, they're not always good beings. The chasm does have an unearthly charm, and it has been noted that in the past snow survived clinging to the steep and overhanging ledges until July. In fact, a Quornford man was said to have brought a sack of snow to Leek Fair on July the 17th and poured it down at the market cross, saying he could fetch 100 load of it. Sir Philip Lee Brocklehurst even has a connection with Lud's Church. Returning from Antarctica on the Endurance, he kept the ship's figurehead as a souvenir and placed it high up in the chasm. Getting the local name of Lady Lud, it could be seen up until the mid-20th century when it finally rotted away. But the rift has even more legendary associations. A 14th century medieval poem, locally rumoured to have been written by the Julacrest monks, tells of Sir Gawain, Knight of the Round Table and King Arthur's nephew, who fought the Green Knight in the depths of his chapel. 'Tis Camelot on New Year's Eve, and Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table are preparing for a great feast. But Arthur's sick of all the jesters and all the promises of fights that get lost, and he thinks to himself, I need something more to entertain me this evening, something to bring a grand new year in with. Suddenly, bursting in through the doors of the great hall, comes a gigantic knight clad completely in green, on a green horse and carrying a large axe. The Green Knight steps down, and says, "I have a game for you this New Year's Eve. I will make a bargain with you. I will give any man in this room the chance to pick up my axe and strike one blow to me. If you kill me, then I'm dead. If you don't, then in a year and a day you will meet me and I will get to use my axe on you." Arthur thinks about the challenge. Immediately, being a brave man, he wants to take up the Green Knight on this challenge. But his knights say, "You can't do that, it could be a trick, you can't risk it." So in the end, it becomes the brave knight Sir Gawain who picks up the axe. The Green Knight steps down off his horse, leans down and bows his head. Gawain picks up the axe and with a mighty swoop chops his head straight off. It rolls across the floor of the court and blood drips from it. But what happens next? The Green Knight, his dismembered head, he leans down, picks it up and places it back. As the blood drips down his neck, he looks at Sir Gawain and says, "In a year and a day, I will see you at my green chapel." Sir Gawain, being a man of his word, agrees to keep this promise, and several months before New Year's Day is due the following year, he sets off in search of the green chapel, which he knows to be a great distance away. Only 3 days from when he needs to keep his promise and meet the Green Knight, he comes upon a castle, and this is the castle of Bertilac and his beautiful wife. They give him great hospitality and bring him in, telling them that they are only a couple of miles away from the Green Chapel itself. He sits down with them to eat that very evening. There's Bertilac, his beautiful wife, but also a strange woman. She is ugly beyond all measure, yet they give her some strange kind of reverence. He has a fantastic night's sleep after his big meal, and wakes up in the morning to meet Bertilac, who makes a little bargain with him. He's going off hunting this day, and he says to Gawain, "Whatever I catch this day, I will give to you if you give to me whatever it is that you gain during the day." And Gawain thinks, "I'm only going to rest and build up my strength, so of course." Later on, Bertilac's beautiful wife approaches Gawain. She looks at him with longing eyes. She tries to kiss him. She tries to make love to him, but he will not let her near, for he is not going to dismay the hospitality of his host. But she manages to sneak a single kiss. He feels terrible for this, but does not want to have to tell Bertilac. When he comes back in and plonks the dead deer straight down on the giant table and says, "Here is your gift, what have you gained this day?" Gawain has to lean across and give him a kiss on the lips. Bertilac, as you can understand, is a bit taken back by this, but asks no further questions. The following day, Bertilac again makes the same deal and goes out. Gawain is again approached by Bertilac's beautiful wife, and this time, although he manages to hold her back and doesn't make love to her, she kisses him 2 times. When Bertilac returns and he places down a boar on the table, Gawain leans over and gives him 2 kisses. And then arrives the 3rd day in the castle of Bertilac. You probably guess what's going to happen. Bertilac again heads out on the hunt, and Gawain is again approached by Bertilac's wife. This time she manages to get past him 3 kisses, but still he will not give in to his urge and make love to her. But she takes off the green girdle that's emblazoned with gold around her hips and gives it to Gawain, saying, "Please, please, take this from me. It will give you protection and save you against all harm from the Green Knight." Gawain thinks, doesn't want to die, and takes it off her. That evening, Bertilac walks back in and places down a fox on the table. Gawain leans across and gives him 3 kisses, but he does not give him the green girdle. He is too scared for his own life. The following morning, he awakes and knows it is time to keep his meeting with the Green Knight. Gawain heads down into the chapel of the Green Knight, a gigantic chasm covered in mosses and lichens and ferns, an unholy place, a haunted place. Looking towards the very end of the chasm, he sees there, taller than life, the Green Knight. He knows what he must do. He walks up towards the Green Knight, and he bows his head before him. He gives him back his gigantic axe, and the Green Knight picks it up, and with one foul swoop heads straight down to Gawain. But Gawain is scared, he twitches, he moves to the side, and the Green Knight lifts back up the axe and laughs his head off. He calls Gawain a coward, he calls into question his honour for daring to twitch. Gawain takes his place once more and agrees that he will not twitch again. The Green Knight lifts up the axe once more, and with one foul swoop slacks him straight in the neck. But it only leaves a tiny wound, for he did not intend it to go straight through his head. Gawain stands up, looks towards the Green Knight, and says, "Why did you not kill me?" And then the Green Knight takes off his covering and reveals that he is none other than Bertilac of the castle. He knows that he had his wife's green girdle, and says that you did not keep your promise to me, though I kept my promise to you. Gawain looks at him and says, "Why did you not kill me?" And he says, "Remember the woman who you met in our dining hall? She is no other than Morgan le Fay. The aim of this challenge was to dishonour Arthur and his men. Although some small dishonour is yours, you have not dishonoured the name of Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, for you have appeared here, and now you are free to go." Gawain heads back to Camelot to tell his grand tale. The knights and Arthur are enchanted with his tale of bravery, but also learn the lessons from it. And from that day on, all of the Knights of Arthur's Round Table wore a green sash in memory of Gawain's great deed, but also of the promise that was not kept. And all of the ladies wore green girdles emblazoned with gold. From the entrance to Lud's Church, passing by the side of Alice's grave, a narrow winding path leads through the ancient gnarled woodland to Castle Rocks. These massive plinths of eroded gritstone are a spectacular sight when they first appear through the dense forest. Sir Philip Brocklehurst used to give guests tours of this valley. Lud's Church was the jewel in the crown, but Castle Rocks was the first sight of grandeur, and the wide view from their summit encroaches on all the senses. Beside Castle Rocks, Sir Philip's track can still be traced. His esteemed friends in their horses and carriage would have followed this down to the old crossing point on the infant River Dane. The original bridge may be gone, but its presence is still felt in local folklore. Upstream from this small bridge is the village of Flash. Flash is famous in local legend, for during the early 1800s and perhaps even earlier, there were gangs of highwaymen known as Flash coiners, who, robbing gold and copper coins off passing travellers and tradesmen, would smelt them down for reuse. There are many smelt mills remaining in the area, and whether they were used for this purpose, we do not know. The bridge I'm standing on is known as Pastor's Bridge and lies right next to one of those smelting mills. The original bridge was lost in a flood during the early 1800s, when this stone and metal one was constructed. It's also the setting for another tale, concerning a passing traveller. He was coming down across the moors on a very dark, cold, windy night, and sought refuge in a local pub. Walking in, a little fat boy walked up to him, looked him up and down and went, "Your hands are going to make very nice pies." As you can imagine, the traveller was somewhat concerned by this comment, but went up to his room. Then he remembered he'd heard tell of this place being an unsavoury location and started to worry. Later on, a man from downstairs came and knocked loudly on his door. He shouted, "I have 2 pistols, come in and I shall shoot." And the man went back downstairs. Loud noises and much brawling came from below. A few hours later, the noises quietened down. and he realised the men had probably passed out in their drunken stupor. He headed downstairs and made his escape. Following the river down so that the dogs couldn't get his scent, he hid underneath Castor's Bridge, and only a short time later heard the men and their hounds come past. But he was not caught, and heading into Leek, found a constable who came up and arrested the men. It was found out there were numerous bodies of dead people, probably travellers, hidden underneath the pub. The men were taken away, tried and hung, and the pub was knocked down to its foundations. Now, not even the ruins can be seen.
Beside Castor's Bridge are the remains of an ancient smelt mill, possibly used by those old bandits bold. Downstream, the valley enters ancient oak woodland, the tree roots clinging to the hard stone, their branches festooned with mosses and lichens. In the deepest part of the gorge is another realm of the fairies, their homes said to be invisible caves in the living rock. Above the enchanting song of the River Dane, the woods are swathed with colour. Bluebell woods shimmer like a flowing stream. Legend tells that the fairies wove together such places with their spells, and any adult entering alone would be pixie-led by their enchantments. The bells of the plant are thought to call the fairies when disturbed, but lore also says if you can turn one of the flowers inside out without tearing it, you will win the heart of the one you love. Like many other plants, the impact of these deep blue blooms goes back further than you may think. The sticky sap was used by Bronze Age people to glue feathers to their arrows, and in medieval times to bind the pages of early books together. The Latin name for this flower is Endymion, who was the lover of the moon goddess Selene. The goddess put Endymion into eternal sleep so she alone could enjoy his beauty. Our walk may end in Bluebell Woods, but our journey does not. And now we must leave the Dane Valley and cross the high dark hills to another river, where we are to meet the spirit of a living legend whose influence has spread out from one small river to flow over the world.